Before we begin, listen carefully, because this story is not a legend, not a horror movie, and not fiction. What you are about to hear was documented, witnessed, and written down by priests, doctors, and spiritual directors who had no reason to lie. If you enjoyed dark, true stories about faith, spiritual warfare, and the unseen battle for the human soul, make sure to subscribe to this channel, click the notification bell, and stay until the end. And please, comment below where you're watching from and how far these videos reach around the world. Your comments help this channel grow and let me know these stories are being heard. Now let me ask you something. What would you do if evil didn't whisper from a distance, but entered your room, threw you across the floor, scratched your skin, and laughed in your face? This is the story of Saint Gemma Galgani, the young Italian woman who became a battlefield between heaven and hell. Gemma Galgani was born in 1878 in Lucca, Italy, into a world that would show her very little mercy. From the beginning, her life was wrapped in suffering, loss, and silence. Her mother died when Gemma was just 7 years old. Not long after, illness crept into her household like an invisible predator. One by one, her siblings grew sick. Her father, once strong and respected, became financially ruined, emotionally broken, and physically weakened. By the time Gemma was a teenager, nearly everything she loved had already been taken from her. But this was only the beginning. While other young girls dreamed of marriage, laughter, and long lives, Gemma's body began to betray her. She suffered from intense spinal pain, migraines that felt like knives inside her skull, and periods of complete paralysis. Doctors could not help her. Medicine failed. Hope seemed absent. She was often confined to bed, staring at cracked ceilings, listening to the sounds of life happening somewhere else. Yet it was in this place of weakness that something unseen took notice of her. Gemma was deeply devout, even as a child. She prayed constantly, spoke to her guardian angel as if speaking to a friend, and longed with painful intensity to belong entirely to God. This desire, pure, burning, relentless, did not go unnoticed. According to Catholic tradition and spiritual theology, souls who draw close to God draw the attention of the enemy as well. And Gemma was about to learn that lesson in the most terrifying way imaginable. The first disturbances were subtle. She would sense a presence in the room when she was alone, an oppressive heaviness, like the air itself had turned hostile. Shadows seemed to move without light. Whispers brushed against her thoughts, planting seeds of despair, self-hatred, and fear. At first, she thought it was illness, exhaustion, imagination. Then the attacks became physical. One night, while praying alone in her room, Gemma felt a sudden violent force strike her body. She described it as being grabbed and thrown, her frail body slamming against the floor. She cried out, but no one came. Her room was locked. No intruder was found. And yet, when morning came, bruises covered her arms. Dark fingerprints pressed into her skin as if burned there. This was not a dream. Her spiritual director, Father Germano Ruopolo, would later document these events in detail. He examined her injuries himself. He saw claw-like marks on her back. He saw swelling, scratches, and signs of physical struggle. Doctors could not explain them. No natural cause fit. And the attacks didn't stop. Demons, Gemma said, would appear to her in hideous forms, grotesque, mocking, filled with hatred. They would insult her relentlessly, calling her worthless, ugly, abandoned by God. They laughed at her prayers. They told her she was insane, that she was damned, that God had forgotten her. Sometimes they would beat her. Gemma described being lifted from the ground and slammed onto furniture, thrown against walls, dragged across the floor. Her small body, already sick and weak, was treated like an object of rage. And throughout it all, the demons mocked her faith, daring her to deny God, daring her to curse the cross. But here is where the story takes a darker and more powerful turn. Gemma discovered something that terrified them. When she could barely move, barely breathe, barely speak, she would make the sign of the cross. Slowly, weakly, sometimes only in her mind. And the demons reacted with fury. She said they screamed. They recoiled. They fled like animals burned by fire. The very symbol they mocked was the thing they feared most. The cross, simple, silent, humble, was stronger than their violence. Yet knowing this did not stop them from returning. The attacks intensified during prayer, especially at night. Gemma would be preparing for confession or deep meditation when the room would suddenly fill with chaos. Objects fell. Sounds erupted. She was pushed, struck, insulted. At times, her body bore the evidence the next day, wounds that could not be explained away. Still, she did not stop praying. What kind of person continues to pray while being beaten by invisible enemies? What kind of soul does not run? This is why Saint Gemma Galgani's story is not just dark, it is terrifyingly inspiring. Her confessor warned her not to seek attention, not to speak publicly about these things. She obeyed. Most of her suffering happened in silence. Only a handful of trusted witnesses knew the truth. And that truth was written down not to glorify horror, but to testify to something far more unsettling. Evil is real, and it recognizes holiness. By the time Gemma Galgani reached her early 20s, the demonic attacks were no longer rare interruptions. They had become a pattern, almost scheduled. She learned to recognize the signs before they began. The sudden heaviness in the air, the unnatural silence, the feeling that she was no longer alone, even when the door was locked and the house asleep. Gemma wrote that the demons hated two moments above all others: prayer and obedience. The moment she knelt to pray, the assaults intensified. It was as if prayer itself provoked them, like light irritating creatures that thrived in darkness. One night, as Gemma prepared for confession, she sensed the presence immediately. She barely had time to make the sign of the cross when she felt a violent shove, sending her crashing into a chair. Her body hit the floor hard. Before she could rise, she felt herself dragged, her back scraping against the wood, her breath knocked out of her lungs. She screamed, but no one heard. The demons mocked her cries, laughing with voices that did not sound human. They told her she was foolish for trusting God. They told her prayer was useless. They told her that suffering meant abandonment. And then they struck her again, harder this time. When the attack finally ended, Gemma lay on the floor unable to move. Her body trembled uncontrollably. The room was in chaos. Furniture shifted, objects displaced, as if a violent struggle had taken place. And yet, there were no intruders, no forced locks, no explanation. The next morning, witnesses saw the marks. Bruises bloomed across her arms and legs. Long scratches, thin and deep, lined her skin like claw marks. Some were red and swollen. Others had already turned dark purple. Father Germano examined her personally. He was shaken, not by Gemma's fear, but by her calm. She spoke of the assault quietly, without exaggeration, without drama. She did not ask why this was happening. She asked only how to endure it better. This is something many people fail to understand about Gemma. She did not see herself as brave. She did not believe she was strong. In fact, she repeatedly called herself weak, cowardly, and unworthy. Yet when faced with physical violence from unseen forces, she refused to surrender her faith. And that refusal enraged them. The demons began attacking her during the day, not just at night. Once, while Gemma was walking across her room, she was suddenly thrown backward as if struck by an invisible hand. She hit the wall and collapsed. Another time, she was knocked from her chair while reading scripture. Witnesses in nearby rooms heard the sound of something heavy falling, but when they rushed in, they found only Gemma on the floor, injured and shaken. Again and again, the same pattern emerged: locked doors, no intruders, visible injuries. The demons insulted her relentlessly. They mocked her poverty. They mocked her sickness. They mocked her desire to become a nun, a dream repeatedly denied because of her fragile health. They told her she was useless to God, that her suffering served no purpose, that her prayers were empty words. But there was something else they did, something darker. They tried to make her hate herself. Gemma described moments when despair flooded her mind so suddenly and so violently that it felt planted, not natural. Thoughts of worthlessness, thoughts of giving up, thoughts that whispered, "End it, stop fighting." She recognized these thoughts as foreign, invasive, not her own, and she fought them with prayer, even when her body was broken. She later said this was one of the most terrifying aspects of the attacks. Not the bruises, not the violence, but the attempt to destroy her interior peace. And yet, even in the worst moments, she noticed something strange. The demons were afraid, not of her strength, not of her suffering. They were afraid of her obedience. When Gemma obeyed her spiritual director, when she accepted correction, when she humbled herself, when she refused to dramatize her experiences, the attacks grew more frantic. It was as if obedience closed doors they wanted open. One night, during a particularly brutal assault, Gemma barely managed to whisper the holy name of Jesus. She later wrote that the demons reacted as if burned, retreating in rage, screaming insults as they fled. The room fell silent. She collapsed in exhaustion, her body aching, her spirit wounded, but still intact. These events were not hidden away as private fantasies. They were recorded, investigated, questioned. Father Germano struggled deeply with what he witnessed. He was cautious, skeptical, and aware of the dangers of illusion. And yet, he could not deny the evidence before him. Gemma's body bore the truth. By this stage of her life, Gemma's body was failing rapidly. Illness had hollowed her out. Tuberculosis weakened her lungs. Her spine curved painfully, making movement agonizing. There were days she could not stand without assistance. Nights she could not sleep because every breath felt borrowed. And yet, strangely, the worse her health became, the more violent the attacks grew. It was as if something sensed time was running out. Gemma wrote that there were moments when the demons no longer hid themselves behind chaos or mockery. Instead, they approached her with cold cruelty, as if speaking from a position of confidence. They told her she was nearing death, that her suffering had been meaningless, that God had allowed everything because he did not care enough to stop it. And the most frightening part? For the first time, she felt abandoned. Prayer no longer brought immediate comfort. The sweetness she once felt during meditation vanished. Silence answered her cries. Gemma described this period as a darkness deeper than pain, a spiritual emptiness that felt endless. This is what mystics later identified as a profound dark night of the soul, but to Gemma, it felt like being left alone in enemy territory. The attacks continued. One evening, while Gemma lay weakened on her bed, she felt a sudden force press down on her chest, stealing her breath. She described it as if something invisible was sitting on her, crushing her lungs. She tried to call out, but could not speak. Panic flooded her body. Her hands shook violently as she struggled to make the sign of the cross. The pressure lifted, just enough for her to gasp. Then she was thrown from the bed. She hit the floor hard, her body already frail, already bruised from previous assaults. She cried out, not in anger, not in protest, but in surrender. She begged God not for relief, but for strength to endure without hatred. And that prayer, quiet, broken, desperate, infuriated them. The demons insulted her with renewed viciousness. They mocked her illness, calling her useless. They mocked her desire for holiness, telling her she would die forgotten, unknown, unloved. They taunted her with visions of peace if she would just stop praying, if she would just give up. She refused. Father Germano grew increasingly alarmed. He worried not only for Gemma's soul, but for her physical survival. He documented nights when sounds of struggle came from her room. Thuds, crashes, the unmistakable noise of something heavy hitting the floor. When he arrived, he often found Gemma injured, trembling, and exhausted. And yet, even in this darkness, something extraordinary occurred. During one particularly severe period of attacks, Gemma began to experience moments of mysterious calm immediately following the violence. She described it as a presence that brought peace without words, strength without explanation. The pain did not vanish, but it became bearable. She believed this was not imagination. She believed heaven was closer than it seemed. There were times when the demons fled suddenly, without warning, leaving behind an unnatural silence. Gemma later said this silence felt different from before, not empty, but watchful, as if something had intervened unseen. Still, the suffering did not stop. In fact, Gemma's health deteriorated so badly that those around her believed death was imminent. She was confined to bed, barely able to eat, barely able to speak. Her body bore the marks of both illness and violence. Yet even as her strength faded, her resolve did not. She wrote that the demons were enraged by one thing above all else: her refusal to hate God. They could bruise her body, they could terrify her mind, but they could not make her turn away. By early 1903, Gemma's body was no longer fighting. It was surrendering. Tuberculosis had consumed her strength. Her spine curved painfully. Her breathing became shallow and labored. She was barely 25 years old, yet she looked decades older, worn down by suffering that no one her age should ever endure. And strangely, the demonic attacks began to fade. Not because Gemma had become stronger, but because the battle was almost over. Father Germano noticed the change first. The violent disturbances ceased. The unexplained bruises stopped appearing. The nights grew quiet, too quiet. It was as if something had withdrawn, watching from a distance. Gemma herself sensed it. She wrote that the demons no longer attacked her openly, but she could feel their rage lingering, powerless to do more. They had failed. Gemma's final days were marked not by terror, but by an eerie peace. The fear that once filled her room vanished. In its place came silence, deep, heavy, and sacred. She no longer spoke of being attacked. Instead, she spoke of surrender, of trust, of offering everything she had suffered for others. She did not glorify her pain. She transformed it. On Holy Saturday, April 11th, 1903, Gemma lay quietly in her bed. Those present described her face as calm, almost radiant. No struggle, no panic, no fear. She whispered prayers softly, her voice fading like a candle reaching its end. And then, she was gone. Saint Gemma Galgani died alone in a small room, but she did not die defeated. Here is what makes her story so unsettling and so powerful. After her death, those who had doubted began to speak. Her spiritual director published his records. Witnesses came forward. Doctors admitted they could not explain her injuries. The claw marks, the bruises, the violent incidents behind locked doors. Her suffering was not dismissed. It was recognized. The church examined her life carefully, too carefully for exaggeration or fantasy. They found consistency, obedience, humility, no desire for attention, no pride, no manipulation. And they found something else. The demons stopped when she died, not because they won, but because they lost access. Gemma's life revealed a terrifying truth many prefer to ignore. Evil does not waste time on souls that pose no threat. Saint Gemma Galgani never preached publicly. She never led crowds. She never performed dramatic exorcisms. She lived hidden, sick, poor, and obedient. And yet hell recognized her as dangerous. Why? Because she refused despair. Because she endured suffering without hatred. Because she trusted God when heaven felt silent. And because every time she traced the sign of the cross, weakly, painfully, sometimes only in her mind, the enemy retreated. This is why her story still matters today. Not because it is frightening, but because it exposes a reality most people don't want to face. Spiritual warfare is real. Holiness provokes resistance. And suffering, when endured with faith, is not meaningless. Saint Gemma Galgani was canonized in 1940. Her name now spoken with reverence. Her room preserved. Her writings studied. Her suffering transformed into testimony. The girl who was thrown across rooms now stands as a warning to darkness itself.